How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you would like to be on the program, I'm going to pause from standard politics. We'll get to Fauci and all the other stuff later. But I want to go back to something I talked about a few weeks ago because it is timely and relevant to the news today. If you'll recall a few weeks ago, I tried not to cry when I talked about it. My kid graduated from high school, and my daughter was there. My wife, I'm not from Alabama, sorry. My wife was there to see my daughter graduate from high school. She was there because of a medicine called Tagrisso. In fact, her doctors asked her this morning if she would participate in an interview for a big story that's coming out about this medicine she's taking called Tagrisso. And my wife has a genetic mutation, EGFR. Her body essentially, if I understand it right, and it's somewhat complicated, but her body produces a protein that it's not supposed to. And the way her body deals with the protein is metastatic tumors in the lungs that encapsulate the proteins. And so this medicine keeps the protein from being produced, which then keeps the tumors from growing, and she can go about her business. The medicine's supposed to work for 2 years. She has another weird mutation, and for some reason, the people with her additional mutation, the medicine just keeps working, and they don't know when it's going to stop. That's why she goes every 3 months. They presume it's going to stop at some point, at which point there's not a lot we can do. Normal chemotherapy, because the tumors are so small, it's not going to work, and we know that. We don't know how long this will go, but there's been remarkable progress in between. There are 3 stories out today that I want to talk about, and the point here is if you focus just on politics right now in the United States, particularly if you're a Republican, you're probably in a state of existential terror. If you're a progressive and you look at the polling of Donald Trump being convicted of 34 counts and he's still ahead in the polls, you probably live in existential terror. If all you can focus on in your life right now is the politics of Washington, D.C. and the presidency, you're probably a miserable person. A couple of weeks ago, I noted this with my child graduated, my wife being there, and we had seen the Northern Lights here in Georgia, and what an amazing time it was to be alive. This guy was like, no, it's not. It's terrible. Think of all the dead babies. A real joy to have this guy comment like that. My reply is, no, it is an amazing time to be alive. A new blood test can predict the risk of breast cancer returning 3 years before tumors show up on scans. More than 2 million women are diagnosed every year with breast cancer, the most prevalent type of cancer. Although treatment has improved in recent decades, the cancer often returns, and if it does, usually at a more advanced stage. But now, research presented to the world's largest cancer conference has shown that a personalized liquid biopsy could provide a very early warning sign that cancer is returning. Results from a trial of the test revealed at the American Society of Clinical Oncology's annual meeting in Chicago suggest that they may help reveal which women need preventative therapy and which patients can be spared it. The test detects minuscule amounts of cancer DNA in the bloodstream. Trial results show it's so sensitive, it can accurately predict the risk of cancer coming back months or even years before the usual signs or symptoms start to emerge. It's an amazing time to be alive. But wait, there's more. the world's first personalized mRNA cancer vaccine for melanoma halves the risk of patients dying or the disease returning, according to trial results that doctors describe as extremely impressive. Melanoma affects more than 150,000 people a year globally. Patients who receive the vaccine after having a stage 3 or stage 4 melanoma removed had a 49% lower risk of dying or the disease recurring after 3 years. Data presented to the world's largest cancer conference showed. All this stuff is coming out this week because there's a massive oncology conference in Chicago where they're presenting research to each other. The 157 patients in the phase 2B trial had high-risk melanomas and either had the jab developed by Moderna and Merck alongside immunotherapy. The vaccine and the Keytruda brought the risk of recurrence down to 25%. The 2.5-year recurrence-free survival rate for the jab in combination with the additional immunotherapy was 74.8% compared with 55.6% for just the immunotherapy alone. That's remarkable. And yes, it's mRNA. But wait, there's more. And this is lung cancer. A recent trial of a new anti-cancer drug reveals 60% of patients are still alive and the cancer did not spread. The protein anaplastic lymphoma kinase ALK plays a crucial role in regulating cell growth. It's produced by the ALK gene in certain cancers, including non-small cell lung cancer. The gene can be rearranged. This leads to uncontrolled cancer growth and spread. NSCLC, that is non-small cell lung cancer, is one of the two main types of lung cancer. It accounts for 80 to 85% of all lung cancer cases. Among these, ALK-positive tumors occur in 3 to 5% of cases. ALK-positive lung cancer tends to be more aggressive and found in younger patients with little to no smoking history. And now, this research in this medicine with this trial shows that 60% of patients receiving this new medicine remained alive without signs of disease progressing, compared to only 8% for those on the other medicine. 60% to 8%. In fact, this research is so remarkable that they've stopped it, and now they've moved all the patients on the other medicine to this particular medicine, lorlatinib. Now, consider that with my wife's cancer. My wife's cancer is a specific genetic mutation of very small lung cancer cells. So again, the tumors in my wife's lungs are too numerous to count, but they're all 5 millimeters or less. And there is some new research related to her medicine where some doctors now believe that if a patient's been on it for 5 years, my wife's been on it for up to 8 years, that the medicine may just keep working indefinitely. My wife is about the longest surviving patient on this medicine now. She's kind of the guinea pig for everybody else. But of others who are now more than 5 years on this medicine, they don't know when the end date is now on this medicine for certain people with certain genetic mutations like my wife. This is an amazing time to be alive. And again, I bring all this up because every single person listening right now, I would venture to say, knows someone affected by cancer. Every single person listening right now probably knows someone affected by cancer. I myself have a wife with cancer. Skin cancer, when it progresses too far, there's nothing you can do about it. A friend of mine's brother-in-law just died of melanoma. Took him 1.5 years to go to the doctor when it first presented itself. People started telling him that might be skin cancer. He didn't want to go. Finally went. It was too late. There's nothing they could do. And now, turns out, with recent advances in medicine, there may be things they can do. Y'all, it's an amazing time to be alive. The advances in science and medicine right now, big pharma gets blasted. We're going to talk about the COVID here at the bottom of the hour, Dr. Fauci and everything. The vaccines did not work as advertised. I was a big advocate of those vaccines because my wife has stage 4 lung cancer. My wife has now gotten COVID several times, and most of the doctors believe had she not had the vaccine, would have been far worse for her. In fact, my wife is in a pool of people where the other people with her lung cancer who got it, they all died. She survived. but it didn't work out well. There are lots of problems with how the experts proceeded. And a lot of people want to slam Big Pharma. You know, I get people who call the show or emailed me, and they say, you know, there's actually a cure to cancer. Doctors found the cure to cancer, but they were all assassinated by Big Pharma. I've gotten this. I'm not making this up. I had somebody call to assure me that they found the cure to cancer, but the doctors were all murdered by Big Pharma because Big Pharma makes a lot of medicine by keeping cancer around. Actually, Big Pharma researches to get rid of cancer. And we're now finding medicines that can wipe out lung cancer and can get rid of, or do early detection on breast cancer so it doesn't come back, and can forestall melanoma. There's a growing body of medicines out there that are fighting successfully cancers. Big Pharma doesn't want you to stay sick. They want you to live a long time knowing that you're going to get other illnesses that they can make money off of. Big Pharma has a profit incentive. The profit incentive is for you to live a very long time, knowing that as you get older, everyone inevitably declines just by virtue of age, and they'll make a lot more money long-term you living as opposed to you dying. But the conspiracy theorists out there, they've convinced themselves, and by the way, they're not experts. None of them are went to medical school, but they read the research, and they know about this cure. You know, I literally was told by a lady, she was a cashier at a grocery store, and she literally told me if my wife would drink high concentration hydrogen peroxide, her cancer would go away. It's wild. I know someone who is very insistent to me that if my wife were to drink in a water hydrogen peroxide dilution frankincense essential oil, that it would take care of her cancer. It is a wild world out there, folks. But it's an amazing time to be alive because they are beginning to find with genetic science. You know, for a long time, they promised the future of genetic science. The future of genetic science was going to be amazing. And nothing ever came about. Nothing ever came about. And it went a long time, and they kept touting it. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, we're finally here. We're finally here. And if you just focus on the politics of the day, if you just focus on what's happening in Washington, you're probably living your life miserably, angry, yelling at the news, complaining about Washington, complaining about the partisans you hate and how everybody's the enemy. And meanwhile, doctors and researchers and scientists, they're finding the things to cure cancers. They're finding the things to keep people like my wife alive. They're finding the things to prolong the lives of your loved ones. It's an amazing time to be alive. Science is amazing, and it doesn't really get covered by most of the national press because it's something that doesn't make you angry. It's something that doesn't make you yell at the TV. It's something that doesn't make you come back for more. In fact, what it does is it makes you realize it is an amazing time to be alive. It is. And all of us should be encouraged by the fact that there are people who get up every morning and they go to work, not to shape public policy, not to win an election, not to punish the enemy, but to save lives. There are a lot of people out there who just want to do research to come up with medicines to save lives. And this week, as a national oncology conference is talking about the genetic research discoveries that are being made, they're amazing. From skin cancer to breast cancer to lung cancer, people's lives are being prolonged and cancers are being eradicated. And it's not just cancer. There's so much more out there that doesn't get a lot of coverage because it doesn't make you angry. So just for a moment, breathe a sigh of relief. The world is going on beyond politics out there, and it's a great world with great research. It's an amazing time to be alive, not just in this country, but globally with the progress of science and medicine. Big Pharma, it's not all bad. It's actually doing some real good. Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Yesterday, I was actually surprised by some of the hate mail I got. Yesterday, I said, if you really want to change things, you got to win elections. And sometimes to win elections, you have to go with candidates who aren't necessarily your cup of tea, but will advance the ball. Now, what I find remarkable here is, like, I can say this and say, Donald Trump's not my cup of tea, but I'd prefer his policies to Joe Biden's. And I'll get hate mail from people saying, I just can't believe you would criticize him. Why don't you support him? I just said I did. But then I get the emails from people saying, I'm not going to vote for that guy because he doesn't agree with me 100% of the time. Look at John McCain. I wouldn't want John McCain in the Senate in Arizona. I want Kerry Lake. Okay, except John McCain won and voted for all the judges. You may not have liked John McCain as the senator from Arizona because of all of his grandstanding maverickness, but you wouldn't have a United States Supreme Court controlled by conservatives right now but for John McCain's votes. So are you willing to settle for someone who can be a thorn in your side, but give you what you want in a larger perspective? Or do you want someone who's going to just go along with you for everything? Because in some states, you can't get that person elected. That's the problem here, is that a lot of people have decided they value purity over everything else. I come back to that polling that's been out for more than a year now that says Republicans are more likely to want to vote for someone who agrees with them as opposed to someone who can win. And I see that in my emails when I tell people, you got to win elections. You want to put points on the board, you got to win elections. And I get angry emails from people saying, well, we keep winning elections, and what are we doing? We're not doing anything, except you're not really winning elections. You lost the Senate because people in Georgia decided not to go vote. You barely won the House because Republicans decided to elect a bunch of crap candidates who couldn't win general elections. At some point, you got to decide you want to win. If you want to help Donald Trump, you got to go win elections in some cases with candidates like Larry Hogan in Maryland, instead of throwing him under the bus saying we'll never support him because he said something about respecting the verdict before the verdict came out. We're not going to support him now. Do you want to be able to win the Senate and put judges on the bench? Because he's going to be a thorn in Donald Trump's side, but he's going to vote for all the judges who are going to protect Donald Trump. So what do you want? Do you want all of your candidates to agree with you, or do you want candidates who agree with you 80% of the time who actually can win? It's your call, people. It's like Swiss America. They want to help you protect your hard-earned assets right now. It's your call. All you got to do is call them at 800-289-2646. They can educate you about protecting your hard-earned assets and give you their report, The Secret War on Cash. Here's what's happening globally. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they're buying up all the gold reserves. They're expecting economic turmoil to come to this country, and they're laying in wait to take advantage of it. You can find out all about this in Swiss America's report, Secret War on Cash, completely free. You just call 800-289-2646, and you mention my name, Eric. You can text my name, E-R-I-C-K. You just text it to 800-289-2646. You get this report completely for free from Swiss America. By the way, it affects digital forms of currency as well. You can go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric as well, SwissAmerica.com/ERICK, or just text my name or call and mention Eric to 800-289-2646. One more time, 800-289-2646. Get the Secret War on Cash report completely for free from Swiss America. Message and data rates may apply. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Yesterday in Congress, Dr. Fauci testified. I'm not going to dive into a lot of the festering antagonisms in yesterday's hearing with Dr. Fauci and play a lot of audio from that, other than this one from Representative Winstrup. He was on with Maria Bartiromo, and they had this exchange.
Publicly, not publicly, you did not. We find in the internal emails that only through our investigation that, yes, you were talking about it and you knew it was a possibility, but you went on the White House lawn knowing that it could be from the lab, that it could be engineered, and you claimed it came from nature, and you waved a paper written by scientists that you put together to create this process, to create this paper, and they even said that our focus is to disprove the lab leak theory. Now, come on. America's not stupid.
Now, that is Representative Winstrup talking about Fauci and the cover-up of the lab leak theory, which was always the most obvious theory. Remember when Tom Cotton suggested it probably came from a lab? He was vilified by the New York Times. which yesterday finally ran a story with deep analysis on why the lab leak probably was where COVID came from. Remember, the racists on the left wanted you to believe it was the nasty Chinese diet of the wet markets. That's where these savages gave us COVID as opposed to Chinese scientists. And that was always the most bizarre part of all of COVID to me, was the refusal to acknowledge the lab leak that the FBI and the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy has specialists who study this sort of stuff, and they concluded it was the lab. The FBI concluded it was the lab. The CIA, more and more weight has moved in that direction. And yet the media was so dogmatically insistent that it couldn't come from a lab. And they hid behind Dr. Fauci, who now says he never tried to dispute it, but at the time really did. Claiming it was a wet market, it was animal to human interaction. What's more likely, that it was a pangolin or a bat that jumped into human transmission, or in Wuhan, there is a Institute of Virology where they study COVID viruses and study what happens when you mutate COVID viruses? What do you think was more likely? It's always obvious. And this gets me to the revisionism. I was a big advocate of the scientists and the science when COVID started. For a long time in, I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, more than many of you were for a longer period of time. Because of a couple of reasons. One, when I was a kid, I wanted to be one. I was a super nerd when I was a kid. Y'all, I had this chemistry lab in my house when I was a kid. So growing up overseas, you did not have to be a grown-up to buy chemicals. I literally, as a 9 and 10-year-old, would save up my money from doing chores. I didn't get an allowance, but I got paid for doing chores and stuff. And I would spend my money on chemicals. I had a massive chemistry lab. My parents let me set up in a corner of the kitchen. I had beakers and flasks and test tubes, and I had giant bottles of sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid and nitric acid, and I would make chemical paints, and I would do all sorts of stuff. I had so much fun. I was absolutely a chemistry. This will surprise none of you who know me. I was a massive chemistry nerd, and I get the science. And had I not had a terrible experience my first year in college in chemistry, probably would have gone that route, but I didn't. The school I went to is ironic. My daughter is going, and she wants to major in chemistry. They've got a fantastic chemistry department now. When I was in college, they did not, and it was miserable, and I didn't want anything to do with it. Went the law school track instead. But I'm generally informed on these sorts of issues and can read and understand it. And what I understood at the beginning was we were dealing with a novel pathogen, and we had experts at the CDC and the National Institutes of Health, and we should give them the benefit of the doubt. The problem was multifaceted. One, we didn't just give them the benefit of the doubt on the disease, but how to reorder all of society. Governors like Brian Kemp in Georgia and Ron DeSantis in Florida got attacked because they recognized you had to balance not just the healthcare costs, but also the economic costs on people. That you have a whole lot of people dying of the virus. What about this increase in suicides if people are losing their businesses and their homes, among other things, and they can't go to work? There was a balance that had to be done. And the federal government and too many progressive states put too many healthcare wonks in charge of everything. And so you had situations where in California, all these restaurants would be shut down, but you'd find Gavin Newsom eating at one, celebrating people and celebrating birthdays at restaurants where the public itself wasn't allowed to be. But then there were the other issues. I continue to stand by, and I know many of my friends get mad at me when I say this, so much so that we don't even put these clips on social media because it drives people insane, but it's true, that in the beginning there was a lot of research that suggested pretty accurately that if you were infected with COVID and you wore a mask, you could help prevent, or you could reduce the transmission, not prevent it, because of the way airflow directed and the fact of the transmission of the virus, the particulate was so large. But it became very clear within about 6 months in, not only had the virus mutated, but people weren't wearing masks right. It wasn't working. There's never been research that you could not get the virus by wearing a mask. That's why when I look at people on airplanes now wearing masks, like the research was never that you, by wearing a mask, wouldn't get COVID. It was that you who had COVID could reduce the transmission because you were directing the airflow differently with the mask. And also at the time, at the beginning, the size of the water vapor droplet that COVID needed to be on was much larger than towards the end as it's continued to mutate, evolve, and reduce its footprint. A very tiny virus got even smaller. But here's the problem. They mandated masks for everybody. They did a poor job explaining it, and it became obvious over time that masks didn't actually work, and they never walked it back. They were too arrogant to admit that the science had changed, and that's the problem, is that we're dealing with a novel pathogen that no one's experienced before. We're relying on these experts, and these experts got some things right, but the virus evolved, and the things that were right became wrong, or they got things wrong, and they thought they were right, and they never had the humility to either acknowledge the science has changed or we were wrong. They never wanted to do that. So instead, they bound us up in these stupid spread out 6 feet that had no scientific basis at all. There was social distancing as a thing works, but the social distancing is actually much greater spread. The 6 feet apart was never based on any real science, and they're only now willing to admit that. They're only now willing to admit that, yeah, actually it probably was leaked from a lab. They're only now willing to admit that actually we poured all this research into a vaccine, and the vaccine might have done some good at first, but the virus kept mutating, and the vaccines do no good now. I absolutely was an advocate of the vaccine, and I'm still appalled by the number of people 4 years later who, if someone falls over dead, say, was he vaccinated? You know, it dawned on me the other day, you know the people who, they do this on the right in particular. It's a unique defect of the right that if someone drops dead tomorrow, they'll say, were they vaccinated? My friend Alice Stewart was running a couple weeks ago while I was in Rhode Island. She was out running. She fell over dead. Blood clot, as best we could determine. And people on the right were like, oh, 3.5 years ago, she said she got vaccinated. It must have been the vaccine. You know what the left-wing equivalent of this is? You lose your house in a tornado tomorrow. Climate change. It's climate change. It's the same damn thing. It's the tick of the left and the tick of the right. With the right, it's, oh my gosh, it must have been the vaccine. On the left, you have property damage. There's a wildfire. There's a lightning strike. There's a tornado. Climate change, that's what it is. You're destroying the earth. It's the same thing. The one from the left is an over-reliance on the scientists. The one from the right is an overwhelming distrust of the scientists, manifested pretty much in the same way. But the problem is, it's very clear Dr. Fauci did lie. It's very clear that as the science changed, they refused to tell us because they treated us like we were stupid. In fact, as a virus expands, as a virus mutates, a virus changes. Now, viruses mutate over time. This is anyone who's ever taken a basic biology class understands that over time, bacteria and viruses reproduce at such a high rate that they ultimately begin to mutate over time and they change. Well, when they change, their characteristics change. They can bypass, for example, a vaccine, or they can live on a smaller water droplet piece of vapor. It changes the dynamics, and the science should change with the changes. The problem is that Dr. Fauci and the NIH and the CDC refuse to change over time. They dogmatically insisted that we keep schools shut down. They dogmatically insisted that we socially distance. And now we know that a lot of the things they insisted on were things that actually had no scientific basis at all. They were using their clout as scientists to say, we scientists believe this. And in fact, there was no scientific basis. They lied to us. Now, what's the greater problem here? The greater problem here is they fundamentally have undermined so much more than just themselves. There is now a deep distrust for vaccines generally because of this particular situation. There is now deep distrust when public health officials ask you to take action, for example, a big measles outbreak. Well, we're not going to do that. How do we know the scientists are telling the truth? Well, we know because they actually do know how to handle measles. But people are skeptical of it. Skeptical of government in general now. When the government tells you to do something at all now, people are like, well, they got COVID wrong. Why should we listen to them this time? Dr. Fauci is never going to be humble enough to admit the errors. But we're all going to live with the fallout of Dr. Fauci's arrogance and the distrust that has come about because of his arrogance and the unwillingness of people to believe experts who sometimes actually do know what they're talking about. The fallout from this just really can't be understated. And at the same time, think of all the lives that were disrupted, all of the businesses that went out of business, all of the kids who fell behind in reading, writing, and arithmetic because they were grasping for straws. I have said and continue to believe that for a time, you had to show these people some grace because we were dealing with a virus no one had experienced before. These were the experts. This was their moment. We should have relied on their expertise in the beginning to help get us situated. But it became clear 6 months in, if not sooner, that many of them were beginning to exercise too much control over too many aspects of our lives. And many of the politicians in America were willing to abdicate responsibility to the experts so they themselves couldn't get blamed. And the irony here is that the press and the Democrats blamed the politicians, particularly Republican politicians, who decided to not abdicate their roles as elected officials and hand them to the policy-making healthcare experts. So people like Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp got vilified by the press for saying, you know what, I'm the one in charge here, and I've got to make decisions that aren't just based on a virus, but are also based on the economic, societal, and mental health costs to the populations that I'm in charge of. Dr. Fauci's getting his comeuppance. The thing that just creeps me out is this cult of personality that he's got. All these people, they've got the little candles with his picture on them. People saying that they light candles to Dr. Fauci. It's this bizarre cult of personality for a man who did not have the humility enough to recognize he got things wrong, and in fact now is willing to say he never discounted a lab leak theory, when in fact he was the one producing research designed to shut down the theory of the lab. It's good that Republicans are now holding this man accountable for many of the things he did and many of the things he didn't do that he could have done, all because he put his reputation ultimately ahead of everything else. Just honestly, it's good to see the GOP holding him accountable, but also it is kind of wild that there really were millions of Americans who died of this virus. And we act like they had no business, any of the healthcare people, forever recommending the things they recommended, when actually, no, there was a virus that was killing millions of Americans. And they were doing the best they could. The problem is that when it stopped, what they were doing was the best they could do and it wasn't working, they just doubled down instead of recognizing it wasn't working. They lacked humility. Too many people in government lack humility these days. Americans for Prosperity recognizes too many people in Washington lack humility, and they've been going into the states and they've been able to educate voters on the failed policies in Washington and actually provide real simple common sense solutions like the border right now. They've got a great website, secureborder.secureamerica.com, where they talk about the failures in Washington and educate voters on those failures, and then show very common sense tweaks we can do to legislation and policy so that we can fix the border and secure the border and implement common sense conservative solutions like more technology, more border agents, a better border wall, better funding. If you go to secureborder.secureamerica.com, you can see the policy solutions. Americans for Prosperity's foundation has been taking citizens to the border so they can see what's happening at the border, the ecological fallout, the humanitarian fallout from it. But then Americans for Prosperity as well has this great website, secureborder.secureamerica.com, where they're showing you that here are the solutions. They're easy to implement. They can be implemented, and they will work, and you just need to call Congress and get them to do it better than an executive order. Secureborder, secureamerica.com. That's the website. I told you so. I told you so. I told you so. I want it on record. I told you so. Here's what I wrote this morning and what I said on the show earlier. Biden is acting at this particular moment to secure the border because he does not want to secure the border. By waiting until this moment and by broadcasting what he will do, he has given progressive activists enough time to prepare their lawsuits and run to court to enjoin his actions. A progressive judge in California will probably halt the executive order. Biden will try to look tough while also ensuring he can blame the courts for not letting him have his way. And unlike student loans, he will not try to find a way around the injunction. The American Civil Liberties Union is announcing that they will file suit against President Biden's executive order, and they shall do so promptly to stop it, seeking an injunction from a federal court so it cannot go into effect. I told you this would happen. It's why he did it now, because this lawsuit will take time to carry out, so there's no way, if they get the injunction, it will be enforced before the election. Had he done this last year, the lawsuit could have been dispensed with and the executive order gone into force after the ACLU lost the case. But now they can run out the clock, so he can take credit for implementing a policy that will never actually be implemented, knowing progressive groups would sue him to stop the implementation of the policy. I told you that was going to happen, and it has now happened. That's right. This is from Axios. The ACLU announced plans will sue immediately to stop this.